back, everyone, to RoomPack's ResEdChat podcast. If you're new to the show, every episode, our team of hosts brings you timely discussions on a variety of topics of interest to hired professionals who work in and with university housing, residence life, residential education, etc. And today is another in our ongoing series of episodes that we like to do every year, inviting in the current blogging team for RoomPack to help kind of introduce them to our community and talk a little bit more about some of the topics that they are covering in the content that they're creating for the RoomPack blog. So, Alexis, if you want to kick us off, as we usually do, briefly introduce yourself and your professional background, and then we'll get in more to our topic of the day, which I think will be a really interesting one about helping RAs articulate skills for their career after they graduate.
My name is Alexis Karakas. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a residential living coordinator in University of California, Irvine's undergraduate student housing. So I'm actually an alum of UCI. I received my bachelor's in history there. I was a resident advisor for 3 years there. I received my master's of education from USC, University of Southern California. And then I came back and I'm working for them. And this is my third year as a professional.
Awesome. Well, fellow history undergrad major here, so kindred spirits in that regard. And I mean, I think, obviously a lot of folks kind of come in like working as RAs and that sort of thing. And I think, it's always interesting, I guess, just even how things will kind of inform your perspective of like being an undergrad at the institution, now working at the institution, and sort of, you can maybe see yourself in some of the folks that you are working with now. So, but yeah, before we get, too far, obviously, like we said, we're speaking now in October of this year. So you've gone through a lot of your tenure as a member of the RoomPack blogging team. But if you can think back to kind of what inspired you to want to join the team in the first place and kind of just share that before we get on to that topic of the day.
Yeah, I've always loved writing. Since I was a very young teenager, I was always writing books and poetry. I thought I would be a writer. I was able to do some research in both my undergraduate and graduate academic careers. And then I found myself in my professional role, maybe not flexing those muscles as much as I wanted to. So when I first heard about RoomPack's blogging opportunity, it was when Paul from RoomPack had come to do a refresh for our institution. And I was like, that seems right up my alley because I am very interested in having that creative outlet. I'm also very passionate about creating trainings, and I see that RoomPack has this body of knowledge it's trying to build with its content. And so I've just been very excited and I have been contributing to that.
Yeah, and I think there is sort of a through line, certainly, of folks who have some awareness or connection to RoomPack, kind of just are a little bit more privy to the opportunities. We've had other folks, I think, that just kind of stumble upon it, and it's a very sort of like, random thing, and they're like, sure, I'll just kind of throw my hat in the ring for that. But yeah, I think the puzzle pieces coming together for a lot of the folks is that idea of like, enjoying writing and not doing it as much as they used to and wanting to do more, or like folks in PhD programs wanting to keep those muscles strong, because I do think they, kind of the creative muscles sort of atrophy after a bit, so it's like you got to really put that concerted effort into keeping them like loose and everything. But I think it is sort of a great part that I appreciate, certainly being part of the podcast of that Paul is very intentional about curating all of this content versus it just sort of like living kind of buried in a library where it's like, it's well and good. All of it is sort of on demand and available for anybody who wants it, but like sort of, curating it and tying things together for training purposes or whatever else. So it's great that you can contribute on that way, and then just kind of get that kind of personal, professional fulfillment of kind of putting your voice and your writing out there. So yeah, again, for these, we want to kind of give a little bit more of sort of a, dynamic, sort of warm kind of opportunity for folks engaging with the topics that the writers have been putting content out about. So this one, like I said, kind of helping RAs articulate their skills for any field and industry that they may go into after graduating. If you just want to kind of start super high level of like what your experience has been helping RAs do that, and then we'll dig a little bit deeper.
I remember when I first got this professional role, one thing I noticed is that my classifications title is Student Development Specialist. And so while my job is to be a residential living coordinator, the development specialist piece was something that really stood out to me. Supervision is a majority of our role in what I do. And so taking those opportunities within one-on-one meetings to get to know the students, I started to realize that I was bringing in just organically a lot of anecdotes as an alum. Oh, you're such and such major. I have a friend who did that and they did this extracurricular, or they went into this field, or maybe I can ask them this for you, or let me connect them to you. And so I started saying, like, I'm going to be your holistic advisor, let's talk about anything you want, even if it's outside of your role. And then by the end of that first year, I was like, let me do this spring quarter series. We're in quarters here at UCI. And so things get a little lighter by the end of the year, and there was less to fill the one-on-one meetings with. And I kind of scaffolded this curriculum just very unofficially for my RAs. You know, in the beginning, we were talking about what experience do you have creating a resume and interviewing? Oh, just this? Okay, let's work on that. Or in the second time around, it was more like, let's just write down what you want to apply to and what you've been doing in this role. And then we continued to synthesize what we were doing here in the RA role and what they planned on doing. And then kind of building those connections between how we can articulate that within an interview. And then we talked about and we reflected upon, okay, so how have we been using our skills, and how have we been thinking about our role here as an RA this year, going into whatever field you want to go to. So it was kind of this exposition, rising action, and then we were able to have that light bulb moment with each of these students. And by the end, we were doing mock interviews, and we were able to, I have an article out on the RACE method. We were able to create an acronym where how we can structure our responses and such. So it was very interesting to kind of guide them through that for the first time on my end as a supervisor, as a new professional. And then since then, I've been able to administer things like personality quizzes, organizational tips and tricks. We've talked about mental health. And I always try to connect it to not just now, not just this year. How are you going to take that in to your future role as a professional?
There's a lot of layers to this that is really interesting, and I'm excited that we'll at least be able to give kind of honorable mention to as many as we can, and dig into a few here. But that idea of, I think there's kind of a spectrum when like you're in a job, whatever that job is, of like professional development. The organization might do nothing. They might do very kind of directed efforts where they're sort of setting the tone and the schedule, or it's very self-guided from the individual. And sometimes there's just that idea of like, yeah, we'll help do like training and professional development, but it's really just like help you do your job better, like right here and now. It's not really going to be super applicable elsewhere. But then there's also that mindset of like, well, yeah, like we definitely just want you to grow as a person and as a employee in this field. And, it's going to be very transferable and everything. But then that idea of like, certainly the dynamic here, some people as RAs that like are very kind of self-aware of like, I love this, I want to do more of it, I'm going to maybe pursue this as a career. And you're like, yeah, well, I'll help you kind of nurture that and build up your initial kernels and seeds of your professional identity in higher education. But then most RAs don't do that. And like, you'd want them to feel like it was like time well spent. And being an RA does give you a lot of experiences and skills and things like that. So it's like, you'd want it to be like, certainly with your perspective, and like you said, like your title, like my title technically is like, has student development and everything like in it. So like, let me try to help like direct that to a point, but certainly follow this, student staff members lead as to what they aspire to do. How can we get them more of what they feel like they want to kind of further? Maybe what are some gaps or whatever else. So I think it's just interesting, or just what it sounds like to me, I guess, is like, there's maybe sort of a blend of all those different kind of dynamics that I had mentioned. And I guess just to sort of continue on, if you want to speak to any of that, or just generally like why you feel like this is so important, because I guess it's it could serve any of those sort of like needs and things as I sort of outlined. But I don't know, I guess there's a lot there, I guess. So take it as you will, of like what makes this so important to do and to do well.
I had a professor in my capstone course in graduate school say, identify a mission, your guiding mission for the work you do. And I realized that mine was informed by all my experiences leading up to that, specifically the disparities I saw within like maybe my organizations and my extracurriculars, hearing about various other fields and my friends' experiences as a young person in their profession. I remember like as a second year, I'm going into my second year. It's my first RA training. It's that summer. And I remember listening to the content of training and all of these concepts of conflict mediation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it being the first time I heard those things. And all of those concepts informing not just my RA role, but my life, my entire life, and the way I showed up in the academic space, in my personal life, in my future profession. And so my mission is, I want to send out people into their respective workplaces with the skills that we are able to teach here in the RA role. It's very helpful here in the RA role when they're serving their residents and when we're serving students at large. But specifically, there are some that we're learning here together that are going to make us better professionals, whether you are going to be a lawyer, a doctor, a nurse in tech, you are going to be using what we are learning here and maybe creating that application, maybe synthesizing this current role with your future role is going to help you maybe tune in better to this one. Maybe before you leave, we're going to have a conversation and you can kind of gauge with your RAs, like how interested they are in actually participating. And this isn't a part of their job. I don't try to force it on them, but you kind of reciprocate what they're willing to put in. At large, that's my mission, that we're kind of educating our folks here and sending them out with the awareness and intentionality that I think that they should be taking into the workplace.
Yeah, a couple of good points there. And I thought of another one that sort of like feeds into them, but like to sort of bold and circle and underline before I can tee up what I'm going to say, like that idea of like, if you're teaching in a class or you have an employee or whatever else, or like that idea of like drawing kind of relevance or kind of connections or context to things and just being like, oh, wow, this RA job is like giving me a lot and more than just sort of like a free room or a paycheck or whatever else, like, so that could like deepen their kind of appetite or kind of engagement in the role and kind of commitment to it, because they're just like, wow, this is super valuable. I'm getting so much out of this. It's not just kind of like a transactional thing or whatever. And I think it's just like very kind of 30,000 feet view kind of thing, but like the idea of like, if this student feels like their experience, which includes being an RA, I'm sure, in addition to many other things, is just super valuable and meaningful, like they're going to be, a really great alumni, like and maybe volunteer or give or whatever, like, but it's just that idea of like, you're sort of helping in your own way to have them see and be aware of how much they're getting out of this experience at this institution. Yeah. And even just what I said, I think is a really good call out that like, this isn't something that you're forcing on anybody, but I think even just the notion of like opening the door, because I think sometimes people do feel like they sort of like undersell it, like, oh, I was just an RA, whatever, and all that. It's just like, no, it should be on your resume, and you should like be really proud of it, and you should talk about it, and should use it as the example of so many things, and just be like, if you need help with that, like I am here, and like you said, like certain people you're going to kind of be able to gauge, and they're going to be sort of buying into that and wanting to kind of get more support from you. So, yeah, kind of just an interesting dynamic, but. I know one piece of this that was kind of interesting to me to talk about was like, you're doing all this, you're making this investment. Like, what do you think makes a former RA a really great employee?
Yeah, I remember I had a fellow RA and he was applying. This is back when I used to be an RA. He was applying for a role in like a big 5 consulting firm. And the person who was his, and you know how these big companies operate, the person mentoring him while he was applying to the internship was telling him that she was an RA and they love hiring RAs here. And, and it was very interesting to me. I had not heard of this. I was like, oh, good. And then when I continued being an RA and when I started supervising RAs, it was just clear as day. I mean, they always say, okay, emergency response, it teaches you how to be quick on your feet. Or if you're wanting to go into any sort of healthcare field, it's just very transferable. The counseling skills that you learn, you may not want to be a therapist or a counselor. It's the to be emotionally in tune, to pause, to talk about self-regulation, to talk about mental health. These are all very, very important life skills. One thing that I, as a formerly pre-law person, was very interested in is the surprising amount of technical writing that goes into writing an incident report, right? Or any of those administrative pieces that your institution may require of RAs. If you want to go into teaching, you learn curriculum. You learn that, okay, especially if you have a residential curriculum in your institution, and you may be expecting them to create learning outcomes in their program proposals, they're going to have to learn how to write learning outcomes and create assessments. They're going to know what it takes to have a strong command of policy and to communicate policy and educate and learn about accountability. They're going to learn about self-advocacy, right? I know about my rights. I know that there is a process. I know that there are people that are going to take care of me in this space. Like creating the connection between housing and human resources in the workplace has been something that I've been seeing a direct line to. And of course, the biggest one of all is conflict mediation. There's nothing more inevitable than conflict in life. And there is an increasing amount of fear to even touch or articulate conflict. And so in this current era, I think having the mediation skills that it takes to respectfully find compromise, to articulate common ground, emotion is so important. And so all of these make not only great future employees, great RAs, but great people, great parents, maybe. And so these are amazing life skills that we get to put into practice every day as resident advisors. And I feel fortunate to be able to, with my limited life experience, bestow to my RAs.
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it really well. I mean, because that's all like sort of, we could have, I think some people might have been like listening and be like, oh, I don't know, like I can, like, connect the dots or whatever. And I think you just did it very well. Like like it's a lot of things, a lot of really important things that like you can just, even say are like necessary to make good humans, like much, because I think it's like, well, I have more value than just being an employee or whatever. It's like, yes. And, so it's like, this just does not serve your professional identity. It serves like you as a person and everything. So I'm glad you kind of outlined it that way. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's just that idea of no matter what field you go into, it is a sort of incubator for some really good experiences and skills and, just being a part of a team and everything. Like it's just such good stuff. And I hope other people are sort of inspired, I guess, to take up a ssimilar mantle as you did, of really kind of interfacing with this pretty head on and trying to create the structure to, facilitate this for folks, sort of just versus being like kind of reactionary, I guess, of like the student comes to you for like a letter of recommendation or whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot of value in being kind of proactive. But as we wrap up, any final bits of advice or resources that you'd like to share with folks on this topic?
Yeah, I'd like to create that distinction too. Like, it's not how am I harnessing this moment with my RA to create a better worker in the future. It's how am I cultivating a person who's going to be able to advocate for themselves, who's going to show up good for their future patient, who's going to know how serve best whoever they're going to serve in the future, and especially serve themselves as future professionals. So my final bit of advice is, if you can, take this moment, take this year you're supervising this RA, and be intentional with those one-on-one meetings and that relationship that you're creating, because it can create some really valuable impact in this moment in time where we're wondering, oh, there's a lot of stuff in the world going on. I can't do anything. I feel helpless. It has helped me to kind of think to myself that if there's one very small thing that I'm doing, it's talking to these folks and helping them go out into the world as better people, better citizens. I say that with humility. I'm not saying that I'm changing these people and they're all turning out great and I'm the best, but that at least putting in some effort into broadening perspective is some of the coolest work that we could be doing.
I mean, I think it is fair to say, I mean, like doing this kind of stuff, it's like those ripple effects or sort of like, kind of downstream effects, I guess, of just sort of, helping to develop kind of all those skills that you outlined in people helps many other people, like if it's like, hey, if you're good at conflict mediation, you might be like helping sort of be kind of the diplomat between some folks that are disagreeing, on your team, your family, whatever it might be. But yeah, and I think, something that came to my head, and sort of the like final thought and sort of more kind of existential stuff is like kind of so like my point earlier is that idea of like if folks are sort of questioning the value of higher education and college and whatever else, it's like this is a pretty like sturdy way to kind of refute that, of like just this idea of like an environment that you can go into and have a job like this while you're studying and doing this kind of work, like kind of in tandem, and there's kind of the ability of everything to kind of feed off each other and everything. Like it's just such a unique environment to get all of that. So it's like, you would hope, whether it's being an RA, and a lot of students, it is kind of a good chunk of like kind of student staff members, at an institution are RAs, but it's like orientation leader, tour guide, what, like just something where it's just like you're getting a lot out of it, like, and sort of respecting that as sort of a student and as the staff who sort of support them, who can be in a really powerful place to kind of mentor them and guide them, to really fully capture and kind of maximize everything that they're getting out of that opportunity. So appreciate you for doing all that you do, for being a part of the blogging team at RunePact, and for joining me for this episode. Really great stuff, and I just really appreciate your time.
It was lovely to chat. Thank you.